tonight is what's it? Oh my
Subscribe
goodness, no.
to
Yeah,
Loki's channel.
remember to subscribe to. Yeah, you know what? You need to. Okay, so you need to edit this to put it at the beginning of each truck dash. Is like, hey,
Okay.
before you watch our lovely video, remember to slam that like button, activate the bell icon, and subscribe and all that. Remember to subscribe. Remember to turn on notifications. Remember to smash the like button, and if you wanna watch more lovely videos like this, if you want to get more wonderful hot takes, you can find them at my channel, and also you can find them at my good buddy's channel. You know, the Englander. And is that everything?
Looks like it. Yeah.
Yeah. To move on to a slightly different topic. Um, Europe is different from America because in America, more people believe in God and the supernatural than go to church.
Mm.
Like in America, yeah, like in America, virtually everyone, like only maybe 30% of the population is non-religious, and of those, what's it like? Maybe 10% of America is committed atheist. 20% of America is just like sort of lazy agnostic.
Mm.
They don't believe in anything either way. And the remaining like 70% of America is some kind of religious. It might just be a vague belief in God or something, or it might be a very explicit like Christian or Jewish faith. Recently Muslim, of course, as well, though currently I believe Muslims is still a smaller minority than Jews.
Mm.
Of course, it's always hard to measure the number of Jewish people in America because, there's the ethnic versus religious component.
Yeah. Well, you don't get many Muslim migrants, do you? So that kind of.
What we do, we just get the cream of the crop. We just get,
Yeah.
like urologists and neurologists and businessmen.
Yeah.
We do get plenty of Muslim immigrants. We just get like upper class ones mostly.
Well, yeah. Well, a lot of our
Uh,
ones serve coffee and Pret.
oh yeah. No, the sorts who would we don't have Pret in America. At least
Yeah.
if we do, it's not under that name. I don't know what name it is. But what we do have in America is that's more the sort of thing that you would expect to see either a Latin American doing or
Mm.
well, depending on what part of the country it is. Like in Alaska, you'd have a Filipino would do something like that.
Yeah.
Although in Alaska, you tend to get a lot poorer East Asian people as well. Like you get poorer Koreans in Alaska than you do in the lower 48.
Yeah.
However, those poor Koreans aren't like they're not like they don't think of themselves as like what's it? Not like working class type poor. They're entrepreneurial poor. They're the sort of people that'll start a gas station or a
Mm.
restaurant. Uh,
So I guess going back to your original point was just that America is kind of it has a much more you know religious
it's not
um,
it's a much more implicitly religious country, whereas
mm,
I would say that Europe is more explicitly religious.
yeah.
Something like a third of all Europeans still go to church,
Mm.
which is larger, I believe, than the number of the percentage of, may be larger than the number of Americans that actively go to church. However, Europe people are just doing it because of tradition and stuff,
Yeah.
whereas in America people do it because they really believe in it. And the number of people who believe in all that sort of thing but don't go to church just because they're a bit lazy or
Yeah.
maybe they disagree with the church or whatever. That's much larger than the number of people that go to church. Like anyway, no, it's like
Mm.
America's a more implicitly religious country. There's this sort of unconscious, widespread belief in God, whereas I would say that Europe is sort of unconsciously atheist.
Yeah.
Even like in the UK, for instance, you've got atheist vicars, you've got openly atheist vicars in the Church of
Yeah.
England.
And openly gay ones as well.
Yeah. Although I would say that the being openly gay years ago that would have been much less subversive than it is now because it's like well because there'd be the idea of like oh yes I've got certain proclivities to be sure but I don't indulge in them.
Yeah.
No, like
You kind of
yeah.
know that's not the case with if someone actively
Yeah.
kind of announces themselves as gay today.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's a good point though. With
No, it's just
I think it's a good point.
as you were saying.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's a good point, as you said, with the kind of explicit versus implicit, because in Europe, where you have the kind of the whole history of the Catholic faith, and you have the papacy in Rome, it's all these kind of very immense institutions which have had this big
It's
legacy.
also vaguely political as
Mm,
well.
yeah,
In Europe, there's this sort of idea that no one ever really believed in it. At least no one that was in the top, no one that was in control ever really believed in it. You know, there's this idea that none of the popes really believed in it, and it was sort of like it really was just a tool to control the proletariat.
yeah,
Whereas what you get in America is much more zealous. You know, it's like people really believe in it, and the people
yeah,
that are involved in it really do believe in it.
yeah. And it's quite funny really because
You know, just because it's not really a political thing, because well, ironically, sort of, you know, because America, what's it like? America is sort of yeah.
sorry, carry on.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm having a delay on my audio, so I think you picked it up later. Continue with your train of thought.
You said it's quite funny, really, and it's like, oh, go on.
Okay. Well, it's quite funny, really. That.
Okay. Well, my train of thought was just this audio. This delay is
Yeah.
going to be the bane of us.
It will be. Like you continue. I will say nothing, and then I'll jump in.
I just hope you don't lose your train of thought either. Okay, so the thing I was gonna say is just that it's kind of sad almost, or what's it? No, even though it's a good thing, I think that America is implicitly religious, but it's also a country where we have this idea of religious freedom and like, oh, the church you go to doesn't matter so much in public life. But I'd say the sad thing about that is like the reason why that happened and where that comes from in America was the fact that basically for most of American history, the color of your skin was more important than what religion you were. Um,
Yeah.
just had all sorts of weird effects, you know, where like black people, like black Christians, you know, that were culturally identical to white people in America, ended up being, you know, terribly oppressed for a long time, even though they were no less unruly than their white Southern counterparts.
Mm. And that's why you
Uh,
kind of. That's why you have
but then you get, yeah.
Is why you have the black churches, which I find completely bizarre as someone living in the UK. Like you have kind of churches specifically sort of catering towards an ethnic group.
Yeah, it's become more of a class thing in recent years, but there is still what's it like? There's no idea of a white church anymore, you know, like nobody, like aside from the most bizarre little, they're not even. There's this stereotype of like the racist redneck. As far as I'm aware, that's not even really true anymore. Like lower class people basically don't care about race anymore. It's basically become a fixation of some
Mm.
almost hipsterish type people in the middle classes.
Yeah.
Sort of a midwit problem. Um, you know, but there's not really an idea of like the white churches anymore, but there is still kind of an idea of the black churches. And like occasionally, yeah, you'll get some white people going there that are just like a bit poor and they live in the neighborhood. You know, you'll get some Eminem types there.
Mm.
But or even like Elvis, for instance, you know, Elvis Presley you know, went to black churches virtually his entire life just because that's the neighborhood that he grew up in the
Mm.
backwaters of Mississippi.
Yeah.
Um, no, and that's where he picked up a lot of his style, and that's also how he learned to play guitar. That's why he played in the pentatonic scale. And That's why that's why so many of his backup dancers and backup singers were black, was because he just hired his friends, and a lot of his friends were black because he grew up in a fairly impoverished area.
Mm. And it was kind
It
of
was literally like his childhood friends.
inevitable he would borrow kind of themes from black music if he's been
Yeah, because he wasn't really borrowing it, you know. It's like it's just the water that he grew up swimming in.
mm,
He was born into it.
kind of
Well, you
implanted
know
in him.
what? It's I well, just because sort of is what's it like? Is the thing you have to understand is that well, it's like Thomas Sowell, like black rednecks and white liberals. Black people and white people in America, especially in the South, were virtually always culturally identical, and the idea of stoking racial tension in between them was basically just a political ploy of the upper classes.
Yeah.
Or like, well, like I may have told you before, like even the tradition of jumping over the broom. Originally, that was in slave weddings, but some black people still do it today at their weddings.
Mm,
That originally came from, like that was originally an old Anglo-Saxon and
yeah.
old Germanic tradition from Europe,
Mhm.
because of the sort of gynocentric culture of, well, what you might call the gynocentric patriarchy of ancient sort of, Iron Age Europe. House was very much the domain of the woman, sort of as the sword is sort of the token of masculinity. The broom was sort of the token of femininity.
Mm,
And so it was sort of an important symbol in the marriage tradition. Same reason that rice is thrown at weddings.
yeah.
Now it's like it's all this ancient sort of druidic stuff.
It's funny. It's funny who these things get passed down to and who abandons them.
Yes. But I suppose that's just like how what's it like? I guess that's just like how what's it the black people in Jamaica have some of the most English sounding names in the world,
Mm.
whereas English people living in England tend to have more French sounding names.
Yeah. Depending on the class you come from, that's very true. I mean, if you see with
Yeah.
certainly with middle class and
Well, it depends on the class and the decade as well, because
mm,
the poor people are basically always playing catch up with the upper class.
yeah,
So the poor people basically do what was in fashion 30 years ago.
mm,
So like during a time period when the upper classes are sort of drinking deep of the ancient waters, and sort of, that they'll have more Anglo-Saxon name preference. That tends to be when the lower classes are attempting it. They're like, oh, trying to be a bit of culture, don't you know? And oh, you got to, that's French. Got it, yeah.
mm,
So that tends to be is like when the upper classes go through a parochial phase, tends to be when the lower classes will, like choose French names for their children and things like, oh, Pierre.
mm.
Yeah, that's my boy Pierre, named after, such and such.
Yeah. And one of the times you found that there was like the most kind of Germanic focus on names was actually during sort of World War I time. So I found this out because when I go
Ah,
to remembrance services and they read out the names of the people who lost their lives sadly, and most of them kind of consisted of Alfred, George, and it went on and on. Albert. You had all those sorts of names.
yeah, the sort of like what we might call early Anglo-Saxon, sort of Northern Germanic.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of Fredericks as well.
Mm. There were a few of them. Yeah.
Yes, but of course Fred always was a bit more German than Alf.
Mm.
So you would expect to see, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Um,
in the sort of 19th century, there was that kind of there was a turn towards kind of like an idealization of the Anglo-Saxon times, and sort of an admiration for some of the stories and the myths that of that period.
Yeah, it was
This
sort of a revitalization.
mm,
Yeah.
well, have we completely exhausted this topic, or is there anything you'd like to add? I do have my original.
Uh,
I did have my original point, but it's beyond. We've gone on way too many
no,
tangents.
don't worry. Dad Nabbit, I completely trampled you. I feel that you ought to voice your previous point, and then perhaps we can spin it into its own tangent, or perhaps we should get started on something new, a new topic.
Well, I guess I can make a concluding point because it kind of went on from the that European versus American distinction. Yes, it was that long ago. um, so kind of America is quite funny because of its how religious it is when we consider that it's originally founded as like a secular state, with the church kind of on the side of it. And
Well, if you want to talk about like the go on, but I will. If you're thinking about America as being founded in 1776, yes, that's true. But if you think about America being founded in the 1600s
mm,
or even in the 1500s, that's not really true. But go on.
well, I was only going to go on from that and say that the kind of what kind of kept the um, religiosity of America going was often those what do they call them, the Great Awakenings and that sort of thing, where you had these new waves of religious groups coming in. I mean, you had the Latter Day Saints, and you had the Methodists, you had the Evangelicals, and there's all these groups that kind of you wouldn't couldn't really find in a Catholic country because it was so rigid and kind of stuck to a certain doctrine,
Well,
which
you could, but when you did, it would start a war, like the Hussars in
mm,
Czechia.
yeah. I mean, the only one of the only developments you could really get was something like the Jesuits, where but that was not really that was like an order and a different way of implementing Catholicism or spreading Catholicism rather than changing the nature of it itself.
Yeah.